Hey there, mathletes. Some of you are having a little trouble graphing some of these functions that are sinusoidal functions. And so I'm going to do a series of quick videos that help you with the process. We're going to start with something very simple where the only thing that changes is either the function itself, it's either sine or cosine, or the amplitude, which is going to be the a value that's out in front of the sine or cosine function. And in this case, we have an amplitude right there of 5/2. So let's go ahead and jump into this process because it's a very similar process. We just kind of build on it with the addition of a change in period or a vertical shift or a phase shift. All those we're going to use the same kind of process. We just add a little bit more to it. Okay, so let's start. First, identify the things that we need. Okay, and so we definitely need to know these things to plot points and graph a sinusoidal function. We need to know the amplitude. We need to know the period. We need to know the increment. We need to know the phase shift. And we need to know the vertical shift. Okay, these are the things that we must know. All right, so we're going to start with the easiest piece. The amplitude is going to be the absolute value of that coefficient of a, 5/2. So our amplitude is 5/2. All right. Our period is always found by taking 2 pi and dividing it by the b value. And the b value is always what is in front of that independent variable. So what's in front of x there? That's just 1. So 2 pi divided by 1 is just going to be 2 pi. The increment is what we're going to count by to get our x coordinates for the 5 quarter points. Now, quarter points gives you a little bit of a clue. We're going to take that period and divide it into fourths or quarters. So we're going to take the period here and divide it by 4. And in this case, it's just 2 pi divided by 4, which means pi over 2. A phase shift happens when you have a c value and there is no c value. So our phase shift is 0. And our vertical shift happens when there's a d value, and so there's no d value. So our vertical shift is 0 as well. All right, so once we identify these things, we're ready to start completing our table. Okay, the very first x cell will be filled with what we know our phase shift is. And we know our phase shift here is going to be 0. So we're going to put a 0 in this first cell. And then to get to the subsequent cells, the ones below that in this column, we're just going to add our increment. So we're going to add pi over 2. We're going to do that 4 times. All right, so let's do that. So when we do that, 0 plus pi over 2 is going to give us pi over 2. Then if I add pi over 2 to pi over 2, I have 2 pi over 2, also known as pi. Now if I add pi over 2 plus pi over 2 plus pi over 2, that's going to give us 3 pi over 2. And if I add one more of those, I get 4 pi over 2, which is also known as 2 pi. Great, we have our x column done. Now our y column is going to depend on 2 things. There are 2 things that are going to impact it here. Well, 3, but in this case only 2. 1, the function is going to tell us the pattern we need to follow. 2, the amplitude is going to tell us how high and low we need to go. And 3, if there's a vertical shift, that's going to affect things as well. We don't have a vertical shift here, so that's one less thing to worry about in this particular example. But we do want to keep in mind the pattern of a sine function, okay? The sine function, take a look. We're going to start in the middle, and then we're going to go to the maximum, and then we're going to go back to the middle, then down to the minimum, and then back to the middle. That pattern will always exist with a sine function. So what did we say? We said middle, maximum, middle, minimum, middle. All right. Now, everywhere you see a middle, every cell that is next to the middle thing here, that is going to be our vertical shift. And our vertical shift, in this case, we know to be what? 0. All right, so all of these will be zeros. And then to get your maximum, you're going to add the amplitude. So 0 plus our amplitude. What's our amplitude again? 5 halves. So we're going to add 5 halves there. And to get our minimum, we're going to subtract 5 halves. So now I have 5 points. These are known as our 5 quarter points. We're just going to plot these on the axis. All right, and so in order to do that, a couple things. First, notice that our x-axis has pi as our increment. Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. And we also see that the pi over 2 is halfway between 0 and pi here. It's going to be halfway between 0 and pi here as well. So this is pi over 2, and this will be 3 pi over 2. And then where is 5 halves? That's 2.5. So that's going to be 2 and 1/2. So that's going to help us plot that as well. So 0, 0. We're going to use this pencil to plot these points. Pi over 2 and then 5 halves. It's going to be 2.5 right here. Pi and 0. 3 pi over 2 and negative 5 halves down here. And then 2 pi and 0. Once you get your points plotted like that, you're going to use this graph a function button, and it's going to fill in the rest of these coordinates for you. All right, or the rest of the graph for you. All right, and that's the way you would do this type of problem.